Now, as Jesus was passing by, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. The disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who committed the sin that caused him to be born blind, this man or his parents?" Jesus said, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that the acts of God may be revealed through what happens to him. We must perform the deeds of the one who sent me as long as it is daytime. Night is coming when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said this, Jesus spat on the ground. He bent down, he made some mud with the saliva. He wiped the mud on the blind man's eyes, and he said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." So, the blind man went away, and he washed, and he came back seeing. Now they took the man who used to be blind to the Pharisees, because the day on which Jesus made the mud and caused the man to see was a Sabbath. So the Pharisees asked the man how he had gained his sight. The man said, "He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and now I'm able to see." Now the Jewish religious leaders refused to believe that he had really been born blind and had gained his sight, until at last they summoned the parents of the man. The Pharisees asked the parents, "Is this your son?" "And was he born blind?" "Then how does he now see?" "We know that this is our son, and he was born blind, but we do not know how he is now able to see, nor who caused him to see. Ask him. He is a mature adult. He will speak for himself." Now his parents said these things because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. For the Jewish leaders had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. So the Pharisees summoned the man who used to be blind a second time and said to him, "Promise before God to tell the truth. We know that this man is a sinner." The man said, I don't know whether he is a sinner. I just know one thing, that although I was blind, now I can see." "But what did he do to you? How did he cause you to see?" "I told you already and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want to become one of his disciples too, do you? You are his disciple. We are the disciples of Moses. You were born in complete sinfulness, yet you presume to teach us." And they threw the man out. When Jesus learned they had thrown him out, he found the man, and he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man said, "Well, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said, "You have seen him. He's the one speaking with you." "Lord, I believe. For justice I have come into this world, so that those who do not see may gain their sight, and the ones who see may become blind." So I've just performed for you a few passages of John chapter 9, the story of the blind man. And in that way, I'm performing Scripture. So my name is Matthew Moore. I'm a professor here at Moody, and I teach a class called Performing Scripture as a Dramatic Text. And so I wanted to just take a few minutes to explain what it's like to perform Scriptures and what goes into it. I'm also the founder of a ministry called Lamp and Light Productions, and I travel around the country performing various passages of Scripture, trying to bring them to life, to help people see, hear, and experience the Bible. To remind people that these are real people. These are real stories that happened to real people who had real emotions. And so it's my real privilege in life to help share the Bible, to raise biblical literacy, for people to have a dynamic and unique experience with Scripture, to try to inspire people to read more Scripture and to memorize Scripture passages, and in some cases to memorize them and bring them to life like this. So what goes into this kind of thing? What's it like to perform Bible passages and to embody characters in the Bible? Well, first of all, like any good actor, you're going to study the given circumstances. When I take a passage like this from John chapter 9, I want to study about it. I want to study the context. What's it like to be a blind person in this culture? And, what's going on? Just like any role I might prepare for. A couple years ago, I got to play my all-time dream role, which was Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. And so when I'm preparing for the role of Tevye, I have to study the given circumstances of his life. What's it like? What's his personality like? How much education has he had? And what are the things that make up Tevye? So the given circumstances are very important. When I look at a Bible passage, I'm going to study all about what's going on in that moment, some of the customs maybe of that time, and understand the given circumstances. That leads to the second thing, which is when I speak as a character, what does that character want? You might have heard of this old joke for actors, what's my motivation? Well, that's actually a pretty important question to ask. Like, what do I want? And a way to get to the answer of that question is to ask another question, which is, how do I want the person I'm talking to feel? So when Jesus is talking to Peter, for example, in other sections of the Bible, how does Jesus want Peter to feel? Does he want Peter to be inspired, maybe enthused? Does he want him to feel convicted? These are all important questions, and they inform how I say the line. So when I speak as Jesus, or I speak as Peter, or I speak as a Pharisee, how am I going to say this line? Well, I have to figure out what the character wants, and those go back to the given circumstances. A third thing that comes into play is how high are the stakes of the situation? How badly does a character want what he or she wants? For instance, when Jesus' mother, Mary, is at the wedding, right? The miracle that happened at the wedding in Cana. She comes and asks him, she says to him, they have no wine left. Well, because I've done my homework and I've studied the circumstances about that particular story, I know that in that culture, to run out of wine was a really bad thing. It was kind of an egregious error for you to run out of wine at a wedding. So when Jesus' mother, Mary, comes and talks to Jesus, and she says, they have no wine left, I know that the stakes are really high, right? She really wants him to do something about this problem. And so she might say the line like, they have no wine left, right? As opposed to something that's just simple and easy with no stakes, they have no wine left, as if it were casual. But because I know the stakes of the situation are high, I kind of am informed about how I can communicate this line. The next thing about telling scriptures as a story, right, is a little technical thing, a little phrase I like to use called say it, see it, or be it. And so when I go through the scriptures, I can just say the scriptures, or I can see what's happening off in the distance, or I can actually embody someone on stage. So for example, if I say something like, David reached into his pouch, he took out a stone, he slung it, striking the Philistine in the forehead. Those are actual lines from 1 Samuel. So that's just saying it without much emotion to it. I'm just saying the words. David reached into his pouch, he took out a stone, he slung it, striking the Philistine in the forehead. Or I have the choice of seeing it, imagining this scene as I say it. So I might say something, instead of looking in the eyes of the audience, I would say, he reached into his pouch, he took out a stone, he slung it, striking the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank deeply into his forehead, and Goliath fell down with his face to the ground. So there I'm seeing it. I'm helping the audience imagine it because I'm imagining it too. Or I have the choice of being it, right? David reached into his pouch, he took out a stone, he slung it, striking the Philistine in the forehead. So that might seem like an exciting way to tell a story, and it is, but then you get to the point of being Goliath, and you have to fall to the ground. So sometimes you have to make a different choice of saying it, seeing it, or being it, whatever is the very best idea at the moment to communicate that particular story. Another thing that goes into performing the scriptures and bringing them to life is emotional alignment. Meaning, I'm not going to say any of the scripture just as it's data, right? Just as it's a fact. I'm always going to add emotion to the scriptures. So earlier, when you saw and heard me say the words, Jesus spat on the ground. Jesus spat on the ground. So that's some text from scripture, and I could just say it as data. It's just a fact. Jesus spat on the ground. Or I could add emotion to it, which is really called subtext, right? The emotion that comes underneath the text. So here's what I mean by that. Emotional alignment. Because I know that I've read the Bible through, and I don't know a lot of different instances of Jesus spitting on the ground, I know it's unusual, right? And so if I incorporate the idea, the emotional alignment that Matthew Moore thinks this event is kind of strange, I'll communicate the scripture as if Jesus spat on the ground. That's interesting and different, maybe unusual, maybe it could be gross, I don't know, right? But I've made a personal connection with it, really. I've added my own emotion to it. And you could emotionally align with other people in the story, but I'm adding emotion so that nothing in the Bible is data. I'm communicating it to the audience. But of course, to communicate it to the audience with some kind of emotion attached is a pretty high responsibility. I'm making an interpretive choice. And so, like any teacher or preacher, I want to make sure that I've done my homework so that I can communicate these scriptures. I've prayed over them, I've researched them, and I can make good, informed decisions like any teacher or preacher. Well, the last thing is to make it personal, right? When I played the role of Tevye, I had to think about, how is Tevye's life similar to mine? Like, in what ways has he had experiences that are like my experiences, so that I can make a good emotional and a personal performance when I perform as Tevye? Well, the same thing is true in Scripture, right? What circumstances in my life relate to the circumstances in the story? Or even a passage like the Lord's Prayer or Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. So if I ever speak those words aloud, when has the Lord been my shepherd? When has he corrected my path? When has he helped me restore my soul and helped me relax and lie down in green pastures? So when I think about those events in my life and I communicate Psalm 23, it comes out in a different way because I've made it personal to me. And so in all these different ways of studying the text and making them personal, of using storytelling techniques, I try to tell the story in live and powerful and vivid ways to make people understand that these stories are real. They happen to real people who had real emotions, and that as we take the scriptures into our hearts and our minds, they can make a powerful difference in our lives.